All right, so we are going to get started with tonight's meeting. Again, this meeting is being recorded, and we may take the action items in a different order than they appear on the agenda. So we got Greg coming up at 6:05. Unfortunately, to wait until 6:05 on the dot to tackle Greg and his items. So we'll do a couple of quick things. So the first item we'll tackle is the discussion and vote on a request to waive the electrical permitting fee for Ashburton Avenue Comfort Station. Typically, we don't like to charge ourselves a fee for town projects, so it's pretty straightforward. Jimmy, do you have any questions or comments on that one?
Mr. Chairman.
Anything from your end, Lynn?
Steve, before we get started, I believe we need to ask for a roll call vote where I'm zooming in.
Very good, excellent. Thank
Totally,
you.
yep, good call, Lynn, we can do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Darcy,
Aye.
Mr. Kilcoyne,
Aye.
Ms. Fiddler.
Lynn Fiddler here,
Okay.
and on
We're
Zoom.
open for business.
All right.
No one's in my room, yep.
Perfect. Did you have any questions and comments on like waiving the electrical permitting fee, Lynn?
No, none at all.
All right, perfect. All right, so I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the request by the building commissioner on behalf of High Voltage Associates to waive the electrical permit fee for the beach commission for the restoration of the electrical service at the Ashburton Avenue Comfort Station. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, now we'll do a roll call vote.
Yeah,
Mr.
you can
Darcy,
do roll call.
Aye.
Mr.
Go ahead.
Kilcoyne.
Aye.
Ms. Fiddler.
Aye.
Okay,
Fiddler, aye.
unanimous vote to approve.
Thank
All right.
you.
Awesome. All right, and then next up, we have a discussion and vote on a temporary all alcohol license for the Agricultural and Horticultural Society for the Lemonade Festival.
Mr. Chairman, if
Yep.
I may just, people may recognize this was on at our last meeting.
Yep.
It was inadvertently listed on the agenda as malt and wine when it's all alcohol, so that's the only reason. The motion was correct.
Yep.
But because it was advertised on the agenda, because we had time, we put it back on.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay.
No problem.
Makes sense.
Thanks, Michael. Any questions or comments, Jim?
No, the only question or comment I have is, Lynn, are you feeling well?
I am, I'm okay,
Okay, yeah.
okay.
All right, just
Thank
let
you.
it check. Yep. No questions otherwise.
All right, awesome. Any questions or comments, Lynn?
No, I'm good with this.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Lynn. All right, so I will go ahead and make a motion to approve a one-day liquor license, all alcoholic beverages for Carlton Chandler for the Marshfield Agricultural and Horticultural Society for events at the Marshfield Fairgrounds located at 140 Main Street for the dates of July 8th through July 10th for the Lemonade Music Festival. The hours of the event will be from 12 noon until 10 p.m. for all 3 days, and a copy of the liquor liability insurance is on file. And the police department and the fire department of Marshfield have no issues. Is there a second?
Second.
All's in favor for a roll call vote?
Yeah, roll call.
Say, okay. Mr. Darcy,
Aye.
Mr. Kilcoyne.
Aye.
Ms. Fiddler.
Aye.
Unanimous vote to approve the motion.
All right, and then I've got one more you can kind of take care of. Actually, no, 6:05. Greg,
Right on
you
the-
have the floor, my friend.
Oh, I thought you had one more thing to take up.
The clock printed 6:05 as I was talking, so I decided that we would respect
Yep.
your time.
Thank you. I'm here with NASA from Woods Hole Group, and Joe Rossi is also joining us. NASA will be giving us a presentation, final presentation, and he has sent me the final draft report, which I've sent to Mike Moresco to circulate it to the board members on the long-term coastal resiliency MVP project. With that, I'll turn it over to NASA.
Thank you. Great, well, thank you so much for your time today. I've been working with Greg and Karen and others on this long-term coastal resilience plan since around November. We are here today to present the final recommendations, or the draft recommendations, which we will finalize once we receive any feedback from you all. So the goal, just to provide an overview of this project, the goal of the project is to really develop guiding principles and recommended policies in zoning to proactively reduce future coastal flooding and erosion vulnerabilities, and if necessary, rebuild in a more resilient way after a future catastrophic event. And the planning area is shown on the right-hand side of the screen. That is from roughly Rexton Beach down to the end of Bay Avenue at the Duxbury Town line. So this project included public engagement in each step of the way. We started by evaluating some of the assets and coastal risks. We then developed some policy and zoning scenarios and estimated the economic costs and benefits of those scenarios. And the results, which we're presenting today, are the recommendations, which are in the resiliency plan. So this project is specifically not focused on engineering strategies like seawalls or beach nourishment. It's focused primarily on property level improvements. This is a bit of a roadmap of our project. We've done public outreach and engagement meetings early on in the project, as well as last month. We also did a survey online. We'll be presenting some of the results of that. And we've since then estimated the economic costs and benefits of these different policies and developed these draft recommendations, which we are set to finalize very soon. The workshop and summary survey that we conducted, this is kind of a summary of the findings from that engagement. We found that most participants, there were about 60 people, 62 people that responded, and 62 people that participated in the workshop. And we got similar results in both cases. Most of the participants are from the planning area. They're aware and concerned about coastal flooding, about sea level rise and the impacts. Many of them are taking several different no or low cost actions to reduce their risks, like evacuating when being told to, by having flood insurance, or by monitoring the weather, things like that. But many are also likely willing to take substantial actions, like elevating their property, or flood proofing, or selling their property, if they incur high or frequent flood damages and loss, and or if they're provided with financial support and incentives, in addition to other policies that could help them make good decisions. Most participants were also supportive of the town spending money to improve or maintain neighborhood flood protection infrastructure, like seawalls and drainage and pumping, roadways, etc. But that's not the focus of this project. I just wanted to make you aware that there is strong support in these neighborhoods for increased and continued spending on solutions to their challenges. Some of the participants from outside the planning area are also concerned about equity issues, differences that they perceive in spending in the coastal areas versus other parts of the town, concerned about allowing continued floodplain development and in essence subsidizing what they view as risky private decisions, or framing it as kind of fighting a losing battle with sea level rise and Mother Nature. So these two kind of perceptions exist within the town, but generally everybody recognizes that the area that this project is focused on is facing significant flood risks now and exceedingly so in the future. So the framework for kind of analyzing the cost effectiveness of different strategies to mitigate those risks is called the benefit cost analysis. And FEMA uses benefit cost analysis to determine the future flood risk reduction benefits and compare those with the costs. And ideally what you want to have is the benefits are greater than the costs, right? So you're saving some future damage, avoiding some future damage for less, by taking some action that costs less money than future damage. The types of benefits that are included primarily we're focused on avoided damage and loss. So that's avoided property damage or inventory loss for businesses, etc. But it also could include environmental benefits. So if there was an acquisition project and that property was turned to open space, there's some amount of value that can be associated with that. There are other costs too that were not included in our benefit cost analysis, but which we are aware of, including emergency response costs, cleanup costs, and insurance costs. So if someone does something that reduces their flood insurance premiums, they save money over the long term. So we didn't make an effort to calculate how much money people would save by doing these good things. We just know that they exist out there. On the cost side, we did a good job of coming up with typical costs for different types of strategies, including the construction costs, but also engineering, real estate, legal, and management costs. And also, we also accounted for loss of tax revenue for particular types of strategies, like acquisition, that would result in reduced property tax revenue. We use this tool called HAZUS, which FEMA uses for evaluating the cost effectiveness of projects, and they also use it for hazard mitigation planning for communities. Basically, you include the user provides inputs of building inventory. Building inventory includes information like how high is the first floor off of the ground. That's an important one. Also, things like the replacement value of the building and its contents. And then, in addition to the building inventory, we also provided flood depth maps. And the flood depth maps are coming from the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model, which is now the state standard tool for evaluating future flood risks. So that includes sea level rise, it includes bigger storm surges in the future, and we focused on 2 time horizons, 2030 and 2050. And we included several different return periods, which just means, the lower return period, like a 10-year storm versus a 500-year storm. A 10-year storm is a relatively frequent event, not as extreme as a 500-year storm, which is a very rare event. So we included things from a broad spectrum of that distribution of possible events. And then on the output side, the tool provides you with what's the cost to repair and replace the damaged buildings and contents and inventories that were shown to be damaged by cross-referencing the building locations and their information with these flood information. And then there's also things that are called time-dependent losses. That's, depending on how long or how much damage occurs, you might be out of your house for longer, right? So the temporary relocation costs might go up, or the rental income loss might go up, etc. So the high-level numbers resulting from that damage and loss estimation, we want to just provide you with a range here. We did another presentation to the community back in May, and that is available online that has more detailed results, but I wanted to present the high-level results here before going into recommendations. So under a 10-year event in the 2030 time horizon, we're talking about 1,100 buildings that experience some level of damage or loss in this planning area. The 500-year event, that goes up to 1,500. You can see that when we move forward in time to 2050, where sea level is higher, that more buildings are being damaged in the higher frequency events, these 10-year events. And the 500-year events, the number of buildings damaged in there also go up. Now you can see the values for the value of damage and loss, so from 100 to $200 million in 2030, from about 176 to almost 400 million in 2050. And then we use specific methods to estimate the average annual loss. So that's in any average year in these time horizons, how much would be lost. And so this is pretty staggering, right? So these are frequent. It doesn't mean that you're going to get $11 million of damage every year starting in 2030, but if you average the losses from rare events and frequent events over time, these are the estimates. So $11 million in 2030 up to $16 million in 2050. So there's a pretty good reason, as you can see, why we're doing this project. There's quite a bit of risk if nothing is done to mitigate those risks, and that is kind of the focus of today's presentation. So we evaluated different policies, different combinations of policies together. We considered, voluntary participation in different programs, like grant programs to elevate your house or to buy your house, if it's damaged. So we considered all these different factors in people's behavioral decisions. And what we found was that generally there are a lot of elevation projects that could be eligible for federal grants, which means those projects are cost effective. We found also that it's generally cost effective to require that substantially damaged buildings, which are buildings that are impacted such that the repairs are 50% or higher of their pre-flood building value. So it's very cost effective to require them to elevate higher than what the state's building code minimum would be, just under your standard building code. So we have some recommendations about how you can set higher standards so that those buildings are resilient for a longer term time horizon. We looked at the cost effectiveness of voluntary acquisition projects, which is basically when the town would buy someone's property, often with grant funding from the federal government, or things like eminent domain. So if the town needed to build a bigger seawall, for example, in the future, they may need to take certain property because there's not enough space to build a big enough seawall under current conditions. It's just one example. There's also another policy here that we looked at called regulatory taking. Regulatory takings are technically when you sort of create zoning regulations or other types of regulations that essentially eliminate all potential property value from that property, right? And so if you don't pay a person for the value of their property that they lost, that's considered a regulatory taking. However, generally, many courts have found that restricting floodplain development technically is not a regulatory taking because there's often some residual value left in that property, even if it's just as open space, for example. So we didn't treat it that way in this analysis. We looked at regulatory takings from the perspective of the community level costs and benefits, and we recognized that there's value there for people. And so as we evaluated all three of these properties, which generally are associated with property values, we found that they were generally not cost effective. There were very few cases where acquisitions, voluntary acquisitions could be cost effective, but generally buying people out of their properties costs a lot and costs more than elevating, for example. And then for non-residential buildings, we also looked at dry floodproofing, which is essentially when you make the structure substantially impermeable to water so that it can flood around the building, but the inside the building doesn't get damaged significantly. And we did find a number of dry floodproofing projects that were cost effective, and those projects could be eligible for federal grants as well. And the value of avoided damages from the non-residential buildings was pretty significant. So even though it's a smaller number of potentially fundable projects, it's a lot of avoided damages. So these results, I'm summarizing again what was a much more elaborate analysis, but I wanted to now go into the recommendations. I did also want to mention before I move on that under all of the cost-effective mitigation scenarios that we evaluated, there were still tens of millions of dollars in residual unmitigated losses. So that means even if we elevated every building that was cost-effective to do so, and maybe even a bunch of ones that weren't, there would still end up being tens of millions of dollars in residual unmitigated losses. And so really want to drive home the point that flood insurance is critical, because flood insurance is the mechanism by which those costs don't just come out of individuals' pockets. Just wanted to harp on the importance of flood insurance for a few minutes. So in the most extreme scenario that we evaluated, this 2050 500-year flood, there were only 3% of residential buildings that were damaged, or 7% of buildings that had content damages that would exceed the maximum flood insurance coverage under the National Flood Insurance Program. So if everybody was 100% insured to the maximum that's available, 89% of the total building damages are over $130 million, and 62 million additional dollars of avoided damages to contents, like your furniture and things like that, would be covered by insurance, less deductibles. So that's a pretty substantial proportion of the buildings that could recuperate costs through flood insurance. There, of course, were some that were, had very high building damages that were beyond the coverages that are available. There also was private insurance that could help cover additional costs. But as of 2018, only about 50% of buildings in the FEMA floodplain in Marshfield were insured. So that means that there's a large number of hundreds of households that are not financially prepared for these types of events. So the first recommendation, of course, is to promote flood insurance more. So the town's already promoting flood insurance, actively participating in the community rating system program, which helps to get discounts for flood insurance for people that live in the town or have businesses in the town. And that helps to make coverage more affordable. So we, of course, recommend that the town continue and even increase its involvement in the community rating system. Part of that enhancement would be to update some of the programs, particularly focused on understanding what the existing flood insurance coverage looks like and coming up with coverage improvement strategies that are specific to the town, and also increasing outreach to residents about flood insurance. So there are a variety of different ways that could be done. They could update the brochures that are sent out, do more direct mailings so that property owners that are in this floodplain, or even the ones we identified as being subject to future damage, are receiving that information. Additional meetings, the town already conducts a meeting every year that's focused on flood insurance, but could do more. Could better advertise technical assistance, and there's a variety of other ways that the town could do more on getting the word out about insurance and its importance. We also suggest that the town investigate a parametric community-wide flood insurance option. So this is essentially a policy whereby there are specific predetermined payouts, say $10 million, for a specific hazard that occurs. So it could be a specific flood elevation that occurs at Green Harbor, right? So maybe there's a tide gauge there in the future, and if water goes above a certain level, it kicks in, and this large sum of money that's identified in the policy gets paid out pretty quickly. So the idea there is it saves time to obtain flood insurance payouts versus the whole typical process of applying and going through the claims process with FEMA, et cetera, et cetera. And that money, once obtained, could be used for a variety of purposes, of course, to help pay for the town's own infrastructure damages and repair costs, but also there could be sub-policies for property owners that could also receive payouts that way, and the town could even use it to capitalize a fund that could pay for, that could be used to loan money for matching federal grants to do home elevation projects and things like that. The second recommendation is to establish those higher elevation standards. We identified 3 mechanisms, really mostly 2 mechanisms to really do that. The first is through the wetlands protection bylaw and regulations. We have some specific recommendations for modifying the language in those laws and regulations. Our main recommendation here is that the town used to have, for example, in the wetlands regulations, an elevation, a minimum elevation below which no habitable space was allowed. And that was 11 feet measured to mean sea level. We would propose that be reinstated but raised to a higher level. And that would essentially, it still potentially could still allow for commercial or non-residential spaces below that elevation, but would prevent people from putting their living rooms or bedrooms below that elevation. We also recommended to expand the reach of the existing wetlands regulations focused on LSCSF, land subject to coastal storm flowage, which is essentially your FEMA 100-year floodplain. Right now, there's a buffer zone that's identified, usually about 100 feet, measured from the edge of other wetland boundaries. But land subject to coastal storm flowage does not have a buffer zone. If there was a buffer zone, that would encapsulate most of the additional area, and in some cases maybe a little bit beyond. Most of the additional area that we, based on our Massachusetts coastal waters model, anticipate to be exposed in the future. So today's 100-year floodplain, the same 100-year floodplain that we'll have in 2050. It'll be a bigger floodplain. So this would allow us to potentially to apply this 13-foot standard in a broader area that in the future will be subject to flood risk as well. And then there's another recommendation which pertains to what the state is doing. So the state is currently working on updating its regulations. They're going to be new. They're going to have quite an impact on development in the floodplain. There's a specific coastal resilience article, a model article that was drafted for the Cape Cod Commission, and so we recommended that when those new regulations come out, that the town consider adopting a model article, basically allow the town to review projects for coastal resilience and the impacts on wetlands. Another way to get at this issue is through floodplain zoning. One of the things you could do here as well, from a perspective of zoning, is supposed to regulate uses. So again, here you could regulate uses and below this 13-foot number, and only allow areas below that elevation to be used for things like access or storage and parking. So that would again kind of get to this point of higher elevation while staying within what the zoning code and wetlands protections are allowed to do. And finally, we thought that we've heard that there are challenging conditions in Marshfield for doing things like raising your building. Because the lot sizes are small, because houses are built pretty close together, sometimes because of, the geologic conditions like ledge and things like that. So we thought it would be helpful to create a set of case studies for some of these typical and challenging conditions that could help contractors, not just them, but the public, and also Conservation Commission, Planning Board, etc., to understand how these types of projects can be done in Marshfield's context. Third recommendation is to increase building heights for elevation projects. Currently, the town does have some flexibility built into the zoning code that allows for buildings that are elevating for the purposes of flood protection to build an additional increment above what is stated in the zoning code. So the zoning code may say you can only build to 35 feet. For projects that are in the flood zone, they could elevate potentially an additional foot if the new flood FEMA maps have a foot difference from the old FEMA maps. So it's kind of a convoluted, situation there. I recognize that it was probably done so that there's only an incremental change in how high people can build, so that they don't block their neighbors' views, etc. But with the challenges that we're expecting based on the damage and loss estimation, it's worth considering modifying the building height definition further to allow people to recuperate or even incentivize elevation projects to recuperate potentially lost value by elevating their structures. Meaning if your 35 feet stays the same and you have to elevate higher, it means the amount of space inside your building is shrinking. So instead of measuring it from ground plus the difference between the old and new FEMA maps, we recommend that it just be measured against whatever, whether it's 13-foot number or the minimum elevation required in the state building code, which would tend to be the FEMA base flood elevation plus 1 foot of freeboard for most buildings, except for the most critical buildings. And then this would apply to all new construction or substantial improvements or expansions of the existing uses, but only for the proportions of those structures that meet the flood resistant design standards or meet the wetlands protection standards. So we're not just going to say, yeah, you can elevate an additional 4 feet, you can raise your building height an additional 4 feet, but they're not actually doing the thing you're intending to incentivize, which is to keep things off very close to the ground where they're going to be flooded. So it would only be for people that are following through on the flood protection measures. The fourth recommendation, which is a really critical one, is to pursue federal grants for elevation and dry flood proofing. And the way the federal grants are structured, the projects would be required to meet the local code. So if your code is updated, if your bylaws and ordinances or bylaws and regulations are updated, that higher building standard would apply to these types of projects. There are FEMA grants, which there are plenty. There's a large list of structures that we've identified that are likely to be cost effective according to FEMA's methodology, on the order of 100 to many more. I should say more like 200 or more such structures. So the town needs to publicize those programs and recruit participants for those programs. There's currently a large amount of money in the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program for Massachusetts, I think over $100 million as a result of the COVID-19 disaster. And applications are due October 9th. So the town only has the capacity to support a few of these applications or a few individual property owners per year. And so a way to increase the capacity would be to consider hiring a contractor that could help increase the throughput. And I know that the MCC, I think the Massachusetts Coastal Commission, I believe, Coalition has some services advertised on their website as one example. So that's FEMA, elevating individual structures. There's also, I think the town should also request the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to conduct a hurricane and storm damage reduction feasibility study. That's a lot of words for basically doing something very similar to what we just did. So it would evaluate the cost effectiveness of elevation, dry floodproofing, etc. We wanted to encapsulate the entire planning area that we identified, maybe even beyond that, because there are other areas of flood risk, coastal flood risk, not too far off from where we are. And then if approved, there would be about $100,000 that would be federally funded to do the study. If there were costs in excess of that, the town would have to match those, or the state would have to match those 50-50. And if there were implementation, if the study recommends implementation, the costs to implement would be split 65 federal and 35 non-federal, which for projects like home elevation projects, which could be included in this mix, that 35% non-federal would generally come from the individual property owners. There is a $10 million cap on the federal costs for this type of program, which means that the total project cost could be no more than about $15.5 million. And we identified, I think, close to $30 million worth of cost-effective mitigation projects in this area that would be potentially eligible for this type of program. A great thing about the Army Corps involvement is that they manage the project, which would reduce the limitations imposed by limited staff capacity. So that's positive. The downside, of course, is the 65-35 match versus FEMA, which is 75-25. So that could account, for a $200,000 elevation project, that's an extra $20,000. So nothing to sneeze at. Final recommendation is not about federal grants, but it's a living loan fund, which property owners could borrow from. Would have to be a specific department that would manage this fund. It could be planning, it could be buildings, but it would administer those funds. The select board and town meeting would determine how much money to put into that in any given year, and then the receipts, meaning like the payments back from those loans, would go back into the fund. And eventually, at some point, you'd want to recapitalize or potentially add funding to that program. Moving on. Probably one of the more controversial recommendations that we have is to create a 30-foot setback from public seawalls and potentially also private seawalls. So most of the repetitive losses, those are properties that get damaged, that have multiple claims to FEMA, and amounts over $1,000, for example, in a given period of time. Most of those properties are located along seawalls, and their damage is historically caused by waves crashing into those seawalls, sending over debris, sending over water. That debris, water, stones cause damage. In addition, sometimes the seawalls fail, and that can also cause structural damage to buildings. Elevation in and of itself, raising the building higher, is not going to necessarily mitigate those types of damages, right? Seawalls may still fail, stones may still get thrown into the air, they get thrown, and water goes pretty high if you get down there during wavy events. So really the only way to mitigate those risks is to step back. So typically there's like a 30 to 50 foot zone behind seawalls where that splash and that debris lands. And that's the danger zone. So we are edging on the 30 foot rather than the 50 foot side of that potential zone. We also recognize that the waterfront residential district, which all these areas are in, already has a 30-foot rear yard requirement, but most buildings in this area are also non-conforming, so they have to go to the zoning board of appeals anyways, and their 30-foot rear yard might be one of those things that's waived along the way or varied from the standard. So our recommendation is to modify a chapter in the existing code which actually puts to the select board the responsibility to approve structures. Currently the existing language prohibits structures to be built on or over only the publicly owned seawalls. with approval from the select board. So we would recommend to modify that to say on, over, or within 30 feet of the seawalls and revetments. And that could be, you could get rid of the exemption for private seawalls since they face the same risks as those that are situated behind publicly owned seawalls. That would be a choice up to the town. And, you know, recognizing that that may impact where on the property or potentially how big of a redevelopment on the property could be done, we recommend that you consider reducing the front yard setbacks for parcels that are subject to that 30-foot setback. Now, there's only a 15-foot setback in the front, so you can't quite get to even Stevens, but you can reduce it to the extent that you're willing to. So what else do I want to say about this? I think that's it. The sixth recommendation is to prepare a substantial damage management plan. Substantial damage, again, is when you have 50 damages or repairs that are worth 50% of the pre-flood value. So it's a substantially damaged building. Half or more of the building is damaged. So the community rating system provides substantial new credits to do this, to create a substantial damage management plan. And of course, as you get more credits through the community rating systems, you help make flood insurance more affordable for residents, which of course, hopefully, increases the amount of coverage, which we have explained is very important for the long-term resilience of the neighborhoods. So what does it actually involve? Well, it involves evaluating, rather describing the community's process for evaluating damages to buildings. So specifically, how will we determine that a building is substantially damaged? How do we calculate that? Who's responsible? Maybe even what mechanisms do people have to appeal that decision, if any. It also outlines kind of who's responsible for what, identifies existing data about buildings in the floodplains. It could use, for example, the information that we collected to do our damage estimations. And it lists the steps that the community will take if buildings are determined to be substantially damaged. So this is all to say that after a disaster, you have 1,000 or more properties that are damaged in some respect, you know, according to our estimations, and hundreds of buildings that are substantially damaged. How do you go about identifying which ones are substantially damaged to make sure that when they're rebuilding to safer standards in the future and don't get in that cycle of repeating losses? So that's what this plan is intended to address, to make that process more efficient. And we think that several of the activities we've done for this project could help advance that work. Almost done. The seventh recommendation is to develop flood warning and response capabilities. So this could be a flood warning and response plan. Again, this also is creditable under the community rating system. There's quite even more credits than for the substantial damage management plan. And the idea here is we know that in past floods, you know, people have had vehicles totaled. Certain protective actions could have been taken if they had received early warning about threats, right? We know that as flooding increases, the number of critical facilities that the town has to think about protecting in a given flood also increases. And so what the flood warning and response plan does is it creates a system for first recognizing the threat. So that could be using forecast information that's out there already, or creating publicly available information, or hiring a service to do that for you. It could include things like installing tide gauges and things like that to measure actual water levels. Although that doesn't give you much warning, it just tells you, hey, I'm flooded right now. So forecasting would be important. In addition to forecasting, there are developed messages that are going to be sent out to notify people that there's an impending flood and what to do about it. And those would be specific channels by which you would share that information. And then there's also coordination with critical facilities to ensure that they're also taking reasonable actions. So there's a number of different elements that are going to be further outlined in the report. A recommendation is to pursue federal grants for Dyke Road. Now, I know I said at the beginning of this presentation that infrastructure projects were not part of this project, and that's still true. We didn't do a benefit cost analysis on raising Dyke Road. We didn't attempt to say what would it cost to do that or what are the different ways you could do that. We just know that there are there's a significant concentration of potential damages, both in terms of value. I think about 41% of the value of damages in a 100-year storm in 2030 would be behind Dyke Road, and also 90% of the actual buildings that are substantially damaged would be behind Dyke Road. So we think that there's a good possibility that doing something at Dyke Road would be cost beneficial and would potentially be more efficient than going through the whole federal grants process for all these individual buildings to try to elevate them all. It could be, you can do both of those things and have layers of protection, but something to consider that Dyke Road is potentially going to be a cost-effective, fundable infrastructure project. And so the town could further investigate the costs associated with raising Dyke Road or modifying it to be more, provide higher protection. They could then use the information that we collected for this project to estimate what can be avoided in terms of damages. And if that math looks good, the town could develop and submit a FEMA grant application for the BRIC program, which is Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, which provides pretty large grants for these types of infrastructure projects. Right now, FEMA is prioritizing investment in areas that have high indicators of social vulnerability, and Marshfield, unfortunately, or fortunately, doesn't meet a lot of those criteria, and so there is a bit of a competitiveness challenge, but they still do fund projects that are not specifically focused on those most socially vulnerable populations. Another alternative for this is that you could, I mentioned previously this U.S. Army Corps Hurricane and Storm Damage Reduction Feasibility Study, recommendation 4. Army Corps can also evaluate a project like this as part of that study. The only thing that happens is, well, first of all, there's that, dollar cap on how much they can spend. The other part of it is that you're then competing against yourself for the same maximum federal fund, right? So they can only give you $10 million. You're going to be, instead of spending that money on elevation, you're potentially going to be spending that money on Dyke Road. So that's something to consider. And with that, I'm sure you all have questions, or maybe not, but I expect you might, or have comments.
Yeah, Nasir, thank you for that presentation. That was incredibly informative and helpful, so we appreciate that. It was very thorough. We appreciate that tremendously. So first, what we'll do is we'll go through the select board for any questions or comments, and I know that there are folks here in the audience, so while it's not a public hearing, we will entertain 1 or 2 quick questions from the audience to tackle any questions you guys might have. But first, Joe Flood Ross, I want to thank you for all your work for residents. I'm still waiting for you to change your name legally, but we appreciate all your hard work for the folks in the town of Marshfield. Yeah, if you want to unmute and chime in, Joe, you're more than welcome to.
Sure. Thank you, and thank you, Nasser, for that really great presentation. I want to thank him for incorporating a lot of the work that we've done on the CRS PPI committee, both in what we've already done and the recommendations we've actually come up with ourselves. So I've been a big advocate, and we've actually done it in town, of having multiple plans, repeat multiple strategies, and this will just be another instance of having these things reiterated so that we have a really good understanding of the items that we need to do. And they're not just things to do, they get a CRS credit and they help advance coastal resiliency here in the town of Marshfield. So thank you again, Nasser, for that, and I know we'll be working together over the years, hopefully to start to implement some of these recommendations going forward.
Thank you for your leadership and great ideas.
Yeah, thank you, Joe, and thank you, Nasser. Craig, did you want to weigh in before I go to Jim and Lynn? All right, thanks, Craig. We'll get on to Chip, Java, and Rio very soon.
I apologize, I'm noticing I went over by a lot, so I do apologize to.
No, you're totally fine. That was very informative, so thank you, Nasir. Don't worry at all. Jim, do you have any questions or comments you wanted to make on the presentation?
Just very quick. Nessa, thank you very much. I enjoyed your presentation in May as well, so we chatted then, and I asked quite a few questions then. This is, you kind of draft final results. My takeaway is from a 50,000 foot level is that maybe we do need to take a look at infrastructure analysis study like this one, and then overlay these two findings, and then look at the best cost approach on how to save the most amount of property with the least amount of money. Also, we may want to consider as a town, considering this has huge impact. If you're talking about in a 10-year storm with 1,100 buildings in 2030, that's around the corner, $105 million loss. Those are not sustainable, even if we are insured. Insurance is really reactive, so it doesn't really solve the problem. So we might want to look at setting up a separate, like we have now on some other boards and commissions, a separate commissioner board, which would be a floodplain board. Maybe look at identifying some specific floodplain regulations for this board, so we can help guide the homeowners through their processes, as well as work with building. And otherwise than that, thank you very much. Appreciate the effort.
Thank you.
Awesome. Lynn, I know that building is right in your wheelhouse, so I think you're going to be perfect to kind of chime in on this one and to get your thoughts.
Okay, I appreciate the hard work, and I really look forward to seeing that draft come to fruition. But I am interested in understanding the case studies that you would use for a representation to our board in our town, and understand how they would jive with what we're doing here. I also am very interested in the wetland protection and the comments about going to 13 feet from 11 feet and the impact that would have on redevelopment, remodeling, and things of that nature. So I know there's a lot of work to do. I understand bylaws are critically important here in town. The 30-foot buffer off the back of the seawall becomes another issue when folks are looking to just continue in their footprint and not become any more non-conforming. So I'm sure, Greg, we have a lot to talk about, and I appreciate everything you have to say. So I've got a lot of work ahead of me to understand everything you just said. That was quite intensive, so I appreciate it.
I'm sorry, yeah. There's a long report to read at the beach. So.
Thankfully, a lot of beach in Marshfield this year, so there's plenty of area to read it.
Okay.
And so thank you, Nasir, for that. And I know it's not a public hearing, right? And a lot of this presentation was covered on May 26th at the Senior Center. But I know we do have folks in the audience, so if folks have like one or two quick questions, we're willing to entertain that. So are there any folks in the audience who want to ask a quick question? Yeah, go ahead.
Sure, I have, NASA, have you taken a walk down to Green Harbor Beach and seen the natural?
Sure, yep. And not to cut you off, we just need your name and your address, and then you're
Sure.
totally free to ask your question. Thank you.
My name is Meg Good.
Yep.
And my address is 208 Bay Ave.
Awesome, thank you.
Have you been down in the last 2 years on a regular basis to see how much our sand has come back without any man getting involved? All nature has done it by itself. The dunes are growing at an unbelievable rate. Once we took down the fence, it is absolutely beautiful. The sand level has to be up 2 feet, and we have more beach than we have in the last 10 years. And man hasn't gotten involved. No. And I also want to just make out one point, that last year in 2021, wind caused more damage to the town of Marshfield than flooding. And are we going to do all these things? Is people going to have to, the trees in Marshfield caused more damage than floods did?
Thank you. Yes. Yes. No, I'm familiar with the improvements that have happened at Green Harbor Beach, and always love to see dunes naturally developing once man is taken out of it. Like you said, removal of that fence, had a positive impact on on the resulting dune development. So that's great to see.
Do we know that if we get
Oh,
involved?
just let them finish and we'll
Oh,
circle.
okay.
Yep. Thank you very much. Do you want to continue, Nasir?
Yeah, no, that's all I was going to say. That you know, I'm aware of it and think it's a great development.
Have you been down to Green Harbor Beach
Yes,
recently?
yes. Well, during this project, so since November, been down twice.
So can we guarantee that if we do projects, like the jetties cause more damage, the seawall caused more damage, those were the Corps of Engineers that came up with those plans, that caused more damage to the houses than improve them. Can we guarantee that everything that you come up with is not gonna cause more problems?
Yeah, I mean, the actual physical strategies involved in these recommendations are to elevate homes, which can do no worse from a coastal flooding perspective than the existing homes that are there. In a very, very limited case where it's cost effective to do so, there were some acquisitions, but very limited. And then dry flood proofing is essentially just making the building's exterior harder for water to get into. So that shouldn't make anything worse either. These are pretty low impact policy driven mitigation strategies. We're not, we didn't focus on raising seawalls, which cause greater erosion in front of the seawalls. We didn't focus on beach nourishment, which has costs and property rights challenges of its own. So there are a lot of other strategies that the town has investigated, has acted upon, has evaluated separately that we did not go into. That might be more of the variety that you seem to be concerned about. That would sort of.
I'm concerned about
Okay.
also raising.
Sure, so ma'am, so if you want to follow up with me, I'll give you my email and we'll get
I
off
just have
and
one
follow up
quick
on your
question.
question. Sure, so but we have a lot of folks here, so.
One last question.
But you've
If
gotten
we
a few,
raise-
ma'am, though, hold on, so you've gotten a few questions so far, so I'll give you my email and we'll follow
No,
up with you
I'm all
absolutely,
set. I
but
wanted to
we
know
have a
what
lot
his
of folks
opinion-
here, so
Okay, I'll let them.
we'll take one more audience question very quickly, and I promise we'll get back to you.
That's
I'll give
okay.
you my info, we'll get back to you for
I'm
sure,
all
but is
set,
there anyone
thank
else
you.
who has one quick question in the audience? Sure.
Yeah, my name is Mike Fay, 169 Plymouth Ave. I'm very concerned about some of these zoning regulations and the 30-foot setback. The 30-foot setback alone, especially in the Ocean Bluff area, there's 30 feet between the revetment and 139, some places less. If you take away the home and the patios and the decks, the splash over is going to cause erosion and sinkholes, and 139 and the utility is going to be at risk, like within a matter of months, maybe even short years. And the zoning regulations, I feel they infringe on a lot of property rights and personal freedoms that people enjoy and moved here, and we don't have many homeowners associations, and restricting that is going to be a tremendous impact on the town of Marshfield. I also wrote my concerns down here, which
Yeah, we'll take
and I'll
that.
email them to you too.
Perfect, thank you very much, we appreciate that. So Nasir, were you able to hear the question?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks.
No, I recognize that there's, with any regulation, you're balancing, and I say you as in the town officials who have to make these policies, balancing public interests and private interests. And with the 30-foot setback, for example, which I anticipated would be one of those issues that is more controversial for that reason, because of those trade-offs. We tried to be even-handed, so not recommending that the town do a 100-foot setback, which would really provide space to deal with erosion, ensure safety and all these things like that. We didn't go to the 50-foot setback, which would have made most of the properties unredevelopable. But with the 30-foot setback, we felt like there was a balance to be made. In many places, the 30-foot setback is already the VE zone. And in the VE zone, it's very hard to build a variety of structures anyways. So we tried to be balanced. We tried to make it there's a technical reason for 30 feet, but there's also considerations of how much space would there be remaining on those oceanfront parcels to enable rebuilding in some future event. And again, this is not intended to say that if you have an existing deck, you have to tear it down tomorrow because this policy exists. It's more like if that thing that you built there was substantially damaged in the future and you wanted to go for a building permit to rebuild it, that's when this would be triggered. Or if you wanted to expand your house towards the back, towards the seawall, that's when this would be triggered. So again, I do understand why you're concerned about it. From your perspective, I totally get it. This is simply our job was just to figure out a way to deal with the repetitive losses that are occurring in those areas, and building taller seawalls is not a feasible long-term strategy.
Awesome, thank you, Nasir. And again, if you guys want to get in touch, I'll give you my email and town hall email to get in touch and follow up more. But Nasir, we appreciate the menu of options that you provided in your time tonight, and same to you, Greg and Joe, and all your tireless work. So again, it's a menu of options, right? So all things we got to consider, but we appreciate the presentation today. It was very thorough, very informative. And again, if you guys want to get in touch, I promise we'll get back to you and all that good stuff. So thank you guys tonight for your time, and thanks for your presentation. And we're going to move on to the next action item. So thank you guys, and Greg, get back to Java, Chip, and Rio, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to move on to action item number 2, which is a discussion and vote on the application for the annual peddler's license for Gonzalez Food Truck. Really happy to see a number of food trucks coming to Marshfield and looking for their license. So their paperwork appears to be in order. Do you have any questions or comments, Jim?
I did not, I reviewed it, I have no questions, no comments, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Awesome. Any questions or comment, Lynn?
No.
All right, awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and make a motion to approve the annual peddler's license for Gonzalez Food Truck, the Wanderson Gonzalez of Taunton, to serve Mexican food at events in Marshfield, pending approval from the Board of Health and the Marshfield Fire Department. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and duly recorded. Roll call is in order. Mr. Darcy.
Aye.
Mr. Kilcoyne.
Aye.
Ms. Fiddler.
Aye.
Unanimous vote to approve the annual peddler's license.
All right, awesome. So next up, we have a discussion and vote on annual reappointments. So we have Sherry Costello to the advisory board, we have Susan McCallum to the open space committee, and we have Richard Wadwell to the waterways committee. And these are folks who have all seeking reappointment. Do you have any questions or comments, Jim?
I do not support their reappointment, thank you.
Any questions or comments, Lynn?
I do not.
All right, so I'll go.
Appreciate their work.
Awesome. So I'll go ahead and make a motion to reappoint Sherry Costello to the advisory board, Susan McCallum to the open space committee, and Richard Wadwell to the waterways committee. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and duly seconded. Roll call is in order. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Darcy.
Aye.
Mr. Kilcoyne.
Aye.
Ms. Fiddler.
Aye.
Unanimous vote to reappoint Sherry Costello, Susan McCallum, and Richard Rodwell.
Excellent. So next up, we have a discussion and vote on an intermunicipal agreement for the North River monitoring and enforcement. Mike, can you give us a rundown on that?
Yes, so as folks know, over the years, North River Commissions have been struggling to get financial assistance from the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth gives the North River some assistance, usually about $50,000. Cities and towns on the river, Marshfield, Pembroke, Hanover, no, I'm gonna leave other towns out, but it's around the river, have sent numerous letters to get financial support. They got the financial support. What the North River Commission, with the support of the North-South River Watershed Association, is looking for, they're looking for some assistance from Marshfield, in particular, the Harbor Master's office, to be able to go out there and, drive up and down the navigable ways of the North River, to make sure that, first and foremost, the people are not speeding. Waking causes a serious environmental damage to the shores. And second of all, to make sure that people are out there boating, that they're boating safely, they're not drinking, they're not doing anything crazy, etc. So this agreement sort of spells everything out for the town. We're going to enter into an agreement. They're going to be paying the town of Marshfield money for the harbor masters to cover some of the costs that they'll incur for doing this. Around $17,500.
Awesome. Yeah, it makes sense to me. I know that Mr. Mayles is more than qualified to tackle this task. He's really great at what he does. So, Jim, you have any questions or comments?
No, I was part of this. I started this about a year or so ago, North South Watershed Association, like as we spoke about. It's badly needed. We had a boat that was before funded by the North and South Watershed Association, and they lost their funding. And so it's kind of gone unsupervised, and it is sorely needed. And I looked at scope of services and different things, and it looks like a really good plan. So I appreciate the work that people did and put into this, and especially Harbor Master Mail.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments, Lynn?
The only question I had was on number 3, point of contact. Is that something that comes later, Michael?
The point of contact, so there is a point of contact. For the town, it would be the harbor master, and for the North-South River Watershed Association, there is a gentleman, he's the administrator. Let me just
His
see if
name
I
Joe,
have.
Mike Joe, something, that was the guy we went on the boat with.
Yes.
Yeah. We can get his individual name.
We can,
We can get it
we'll get the
later.
name for
Yeah.
you, yeah.
He used to be a police chief, I think, in Pembroke or Norwell or something like that.
I just want to see, his name might be in here.
Yeah, I was looking too.
But there is, he's the administrator for it, so he would be the contact on that end, Lynn.
Okay, good enough.
All right,
I'm
awesome.
good.
All right, thank you, Lynn. So I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the intermunicipal agreement in North River monitoring and enforcement between the North River Commission and the town of Marshfield for utilizing the services of the harbor master and assistant harbor masters on behalf of the North River Commission to patrol the navigable portions of the North River in North River corridor within the jurisdiction of the commission. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion been made and duly second, a roll call is in order. Mr. Darcy?
Aye.
Mr. Kilcoyne?
Aye.
Ms. Fiddler?
Aye.
Unanimous vote to accept the intermunicipal agreement between the North River Monitoring and Enforcement and the town of Marshfield.
All right, great. So our last item is a discussion and vote on the licensing agreement with Lone Prime Holdings LLC, Metal Innovations and Artistry. Mike, give us a rundown on that one.
So, the Lone Prime Holdings Inc., for those people that are watching tonight, if you're coming off the highway and heading into Marshfield to Roach Brothers is on the right-hand side. They specialize in motorcycles. What they want to be able to do is they want to landscape some of the islands that are around their property. It's not owned by the town of Marshfield. It's parcels A and B on a map that we have. So they came to the town council's draft a licensing agreement for them, which will allow them to do that. It's a licensing agreement that will need to be renewed annually, and it's before the board tonight to accept. If the board accepts it, they'll be able to landscape and move forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. Any questions or comments, Jim?
It's just a small parcel of land on Lone Street, and it's gonna really make, I think, the place look a lot better as a result of having landscapes, so I appreciate they taking that and doing it.
Awesome. Do you have any questions or comments, Lynn?
Steve, with your permission, I would like to enter into the record the conditions from ZBA case 2007 in relationship to this project. Very quick, it's just 6 conditions.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this decision was dated to February 4th, 2020. The conditions are as follows. There shall be no outside storage of motorcycles, vehicles, parts, or materials. There shall be no overnight parking of vehicles, including outside the building. There shall be no sale of new or used cars or motorcycles on or from the site. All landscaping shall be maintained in good condition and in general in its existing location. All signage shall comply with the zoning bylaws. And then lastly, item number 6 is the regulations for a special permit and the 20 days. So you need to read that into the record. They've done a fabulous job. The site looks amazing. So I am in favor of allowing the town to go forward with this licensing agreement.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Lynn. Do you have anything
Yep.
else you wanted to add?
No, I'm good.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Lynn. All right, so I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the license agreement with Lone Prime Holdings LLC, Metal Innovations and Artistry located at 10 Lone Street. This exclusive license is granted on an annual basis for the period of 12 a.m. July 1st, 2022 to 12 a.m. on June 30th, 2023. The license may be extended by an affirmative vote by the majority of the select board. Is there a second?
Second.
A motion's been made and duly second. Mr. Chairman, a roll call is in order. Mr. Darcy?
Aye.
Mr. Kilcoyne?
Aye.
Ms. Fiddler?
Aye.
Unanimous vote to approve the licensing agreement with Lone Prime Holdings LLC, Metal Innovations and Artistry. Mr. Chairman, if I may, thanks for technology, I was able to look up for Ms. Fiddler the name of the North River Commission Administrator, and it's Gary Walcott.
Gary, yeah.
Gary, okay. Appreciate it.
All right, so I'll go ahead and make a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
We need a roll call.
Oh, yes, fair enough, yeah.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
So,
You almost made it.
yeah, we'll go ahead and take my.
You were really close.
Yes, they're almost there.
Okay. So, Town Administrator's report, I had breakfast with Steve Darcy to go over some issues. My weekly call into WATD. I had a prep meeting with Ian and Lisa on an SMP call. We had a bi-weekly police building committee meeting, and that was followed with a weekly owner, architect, and contractor meeting on the police project. As folks know, the police have been in the building almost 2 weeks now, and we continue to make progress in getting furniture, etc. That's been on order there. There's a number of things that are being worked on right now, such as they were beginning the demolition phase of the old police station, and we'll be moving forward from that. Had our S&P call with our financial brokers. We did very well, and we should hear from them sometime this week. Had the Mayflower Municipal Health Board and Steering Committee, as well as a general meeting. We finished the year, even though it was a challenging year. Mayflower finished with about $36 million, which was really good in a challenging year, with another year with COVID. So insurance is doing well, and our employees get very decent coverage. Marshfield continues to lead the pack in taking advantage of health money that's available for workshops, anything from cooking creatively and healthy to meditation sessions. Just last week we had a therapist here to give massages to relieve stress from our employees. Had a meeting with Maurice to begin to look at what early voting will look like, where it would take place. Been working with the police department on preparations for Levitate at the fairgrounds. Meetings with Bill Grafton regarding permanent decisions for Pratt Farm and Corn Hill. Tentative meeting, we had meetings with the Conservation Commission also on the cleanup of Pratt Farm. I'm happy to report that Pratt Farm has been completely cleaned, and we're in the process of doing a wetland delineation on it. Weekly meeting with Fred Russell, updating us on a number of projects, ongoing projects at the schools and on the municipal side. I also had a finance team meeting, and the finance team meeting, we talked about the financial closeout, FY23, opening the new books up for closeout for FY22, opening the books for FY23. We had on Lisa and Ann, we had our annual budget meeting. Every week we have a budget meeting now that we're getting close to the end of the fiscal year, to make sure everything's tied out, and that we want to make additions of shortfalls at the end of the fiscal year. Under the mass finance laws, we're able to move money from department to department to close gaps. What would be a gap? Well, snow and ice, we're going to cover about $460,000 worth of snow and ice money. So we have until July 14th for all of the FY22 stuff to clear. Prior to that, we'll have a meeting. The Board of Selectmen will have a list of stuff that they'll need to approve. And then that approval then goes to the advisory board, and they approve it, and then we're able to close out those accounts. I did a statewide opiate settlement funds. We're very close to start to receiving some money. As folks know, who've been watching our meeting, we got involved in 2018 on this national opiate settlement, and we're going to start to receive some funds sometime this summer. So that's very exciting. As folks know, a number of us attended the senior center ribbon cutting. They had about 300 people there, and a really nice celebration, some great speeches. The doctor from UMass that was responsible for the most recent study was there, and things worked out really well. That is my town administrator report.
Awesome, thanks, Michael. Did you want to touch base on the vaccination testing clinic update?
Yes, thank you very much. So very quickly, we still continue to have the clinics Tuesdays and Thursdays. We're averaging about 15 people per day. And on top of that, we get another 2 to 8 walk-ins depending on the day. And we're continuing to do the PCR testing right now. We had a meeting with Dr. Irons, and we're going to be moving to giving vaccines to 5 to 12-year-olds.
Awesome.
So it's in demand. There's not a lot of locations available to do that. The Commonwealth, it's one of their initiatives. They actually wanted us to do infants to 12. Infants are really tough to do. Not that we don't have the proper staff, but we're in an office setting, so all that crying, I think, would drive the employees crazy. So we certainly want to be able to help people, but there are other areas to do infants. So we're going to do that. We still continue to be reimbursed for those. There's no cost to the town. On July 1, the feds will continue to reimburse at 90%. We also get the money at the $40 shots, and then that stopgap at 10% is covered by ARPA funding. So we hope to be able to start. So we have to write out the plan. Dr. Irons has to officially approve it, all the protocols, and our goal is somewhere before the 15th of July we'll start to begin. We're going to stay with the same schedule, Tuesdays and Thursdays here at Town Hall. By that time, by the middle of the month, we will probably stop doing the PCR testing right now. We have plenty of home kits for anyone that needs them. We'll continue to give those out on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And right now, COVID sort of leveled off. It didn't dissipate. People remember last summer it dissipated, but the variants that are out there right now, you know, I'm constantly reading up on the stuff. It's sort of plateaued, but there's a number of cases out there. People keep being reinfected. That's why they encourage folks to get out, get their booster shots, and you know, we're hearing sometime in October or November they're going to have a standard shot out. There will be sort of the new wave going into, you know, getting yearly shots. So there's more, but that's what we're doing right now, and that's the clinic. You know, special thanks to you know, Bill Hawking, who's our healthcare consultant that's working with that, and our fire consultant, and Todd Goodwin, and to our own IT staff. So.
Awesome. Yeah, you've had a great foresight from the beginning, so we appreciate how on top of this you are, and we'll follow your leads. You've been great from the get-go, so we appreciate your foresight, Michael.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions or comments, Jim?
I do not, thank you.
Any questions or comments, Lynn?
No, I appreciate all the work he's been doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Greg. All right, so I'll make a
Especially
motion.
in COVID.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and make a motion to join tonight's meeting. Is there a second? Second.
Motion been made and duly second. Roll call is in order. Mr. Darcy.
Aye.
Mr. Kilcoyne.
Aye.
Ms. Fiddler.
Have a
Nan-
lovely evening.
Thank you. Unanimous vote to adjourn.
Take care, Lynn.
Get well, Lynn. Thank you.
I will, appreciate it.